going to start discussing with you how to do a grid. A grid system is basically a set of coordinates that you use to draw something. Or you can think of it as taking your picture and chopping it up into a puzzle. So right here we have a picture of a bird that we're going to be using pretty soon. But first, let me discuss with you the actual size that you're going to be using. Now, a grid system only works if you keep your grid boxes square. They have to be square. It doesn't matter if they're 1 inch by 1 inch, 2 inch by 2 inch, 5 inch by 5 inch, 3 feet by 3 feet, it doesn't matter. In fact, grid systems are a really accurate way to blow something up from a small size to a large size and inversely. So anytime you use a grid, all you're doing is you're breaking down big chunks of information into little sections, much like a puzzle piece. So instead of putting them all together randomly, trying to figure out how they fit together, you're doing it as you go along using one set of proportions in one box and comparing it to what's around you. So let's discuss in depth a little bit more how this kind of works. So I'm going to go ahead and get out a smaller version of this. I'm going to put this one aside for a moment. So with a grid, you have something similar to this. And inside your grid, you have these boxes. And you can have more or less boxes. Maybe your grid will only be 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? I gave you a large size grid to experiment with, but yours can only be maybe 4 by 4. 4 chunks by 4 chunks like this. That's okay too. It doesn't really matter as long as you're doing it in a way that is square. So how many blocks you have only matters on how you want to do things. And I'll explain that in a couple minutes. But first, let's talk about squareness. What squareness does is it stops you from stretching your proportions. So imagine a picture that somebody took of you, and imagine that they stretched the picture long. Your face would look very strange, right? Imagine that they stretched it sideways. Your face would also look very strange. The same thing happens if we have a different size here of a shape besides a square. Now remember, a square is the same on all sides, but a rectangle is long on 2 sides and shorter on others. So if you have a rectangle, we don't want that. We want a square each time that we're using that in a grid system. That's super important. And a little thing I came up with to help me remember it is keep it square, Care Bear. Sounds kind of silly, but it helps you remember. So keep it square, Care Bear. Just remember that whatever you're going to be drawing has to be absolutely square when you're drawing this grid. Okay, so when you're setting up your grid, that's important. It's important to mark off how you're going to do it. And all you want to do is just use a ruler or anything that you have around you that you know is a certain length. And you want to make sure you mark it the same on each side. So we're going this way like this. We'll pretend this is a ruler, and I'm just going to mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm going to do the same thing going down 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And then I'm going to take something that's flat. It can be the side of a piece of paper, a book, a ruler. It doesn't matter after that, and draw straight lines across. Okay? What I like to do is I like to make sure that I use a ruler so that I keep it side to side like this, and I can just kind of find if it matches the edge here. But you can do whatever you want. Now here's the thing. If you mess up your square grid, you have to redo it. Because if you don't redo it, it's going to look weird. Your last drawing, like when you finish it, you may shade it and it looks pretty, but the proportions are going to be out of whack. So grids help us with proportion, and proportion is the distance between something, the angle between something, the size of something, okay? It's all these different things that relate to one another, and for us to have proportion, we have to have context. So context is, if I put this on the table right here with nothing around it at all, without something around it, how do we know that this table isn't 40 feet by 40 feet? Right? Or this isn't a 12-foot pencil. If it was by itself, who knows, maybe somebody made a 12-foot pencil. It could happen. But when we start adding context, different things to it, we have proportion. Proportion starts to give us clues about things that are in our environment or in the pictures environment that you're drawing. It also gives us something to draw against. So when we have proportion, we also have positive and negative space. So positive being the space that's taken up by a thing, and negative space being the space where it's not taken up by something, like this space right here, this kind of triangular space, or this one, or this weird kind of nebulous space over here, any of these empties, okay? Because as you can see, the empty spaces also sort of make something, even though we're not really drawing them, okay? So all those things give us true form, true space, and true drawing, which means a real form, something that actually we can see that makes sense and is accurate to how we're trying to draw it. So what you're going to want to do is get out your pencil, get out your ruler, and you're going to want to make sure that your pencil's nice and sharp, like always. Mine's not too bad. I don't need to sharpen it at the moment. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at those different things we just discussed, which are the positive and negative shapes, the triangulation, the crosshairs, comparative, and creative ruler. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to get out a grid. And what I've done is I've printed out a grid and just put it on here just for ease of use and for you guys to see a little bit easier here. It's pretty consistent, it's nice and dark. You could do something like this with the transparency that I sent home with you. And if you want to make it permanent, after you've done your other practicing with your clients, you could go ahead and do that with a Sharpie marker. I suggest using a just regular old marker and drawing right on top of it. The dry erase ones work really well if you have one. If not, then you can go ahead and start practicing with your clients on just regular pieces of paper. Don't use necessarily the pictures that I sent home with you. I sent you home hands, I sent you home some elephants, and you can use some of those things, but you can also use things from a magazine. It doesn't really matter. Start with something small and simple. There are multiple ways in which you can use a grid system when you're drawing to help you break down the grid in a different way besides just blocks. And I'm going to go through some of those different ways with you, but first let me discuss what they're actually called so you know what to look for when I'm discussing them. The first one is positive and negative shapes in space. So positive space is the space where something is. So where this phone is, for instance, this is a positive space. We're going to draw the phone. The shape that this makes is the positive space. If we were going to draw the negative space, that would be, for instance, between my hands. It's easy to see all these different shapes that take place between my hands. Those are the negative shapes. Triangulation is when you use 3 points or more to find reference on size, on shape, on distance, on angle, things like that. Then there's crosshairs, where you use these little lines in between the boxes, and I'll get a little closer so you can see them. Like so. And those lines help you just break down the box a little bit further, just like a scope. And the last one here is a comparative or creative ruler, and this only works on grids that you are using to size up to the same size. So if you're drawing from a 1x1 grid, like the size of your drawing is cut into pieces that are 1x1 little puzzle pieces, when you go to draw it again, you're going to draw it in 1x1 size. It only works for that. You don't want to upscale or downscale. So now that we've discussed those a little bit, let me go into showing you examples of these and how we use these in grid drawing. As you can see here, I've numbered and lettered my grid. So starting from the bottom up, I have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I to the side there, and then bottom up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, going like that. Sorry, it's a little shiny, but you can see the points here that I'm trying to make. And then I've enlarged a section here that is also a grid where I'm going to pretend that this is where I've been going to be drawing. For you guys at home, when you're doing your drawing, you're going to need to divide up equally with a ruler or something that's the same size, and go ahead and just do that over and over again. Now, you don't have to have this many. Grids do not have to be this big. Your grid may only be 4x4. It might be 6x6, 8x8, 12x12. It doesn't matter. Whatever works for you. So for this one right here, what we want to do is we want to start in the bottommost or topmost corner, and you kind of work your way across. So you don't start here and then skip out and start drawing this one or like that. You want to kind of go from one into the next one and start to kind of rotate a little bit like that and kind of do it in like a circular motion like this. The reason for that is that it helps with your proportion, and it doesn't leave you with these crazy kind of cookie cutter-esque strange puzzle pieces when you put together the rest of your drawing later on. So the first one we're going to start with here is number 1 down here, A1. And if I look at A1, there's some stuff that goes outside of A1 here, but we're not concerned with that. We're only looking at what's in A1. So I'm going to bring up my grid here, and let's talk about a couple of those things that we discussed just a little while ago. Let's talk about our negative space and positive shapes in space, okay? And let's do an example of that. A good example of your negative space and shapes can be by using this kind of method right here, where we're going to take and we're going to find a very easy to identify shape inside of here. So if we look over here, that almost looks like a triangle on this side here, but it's not quite a triangle, is it? But if we were going to pretend it was, it doesn't quite do a half and half, okay? So that kind of helps us visually break up this image a little bit. So let me erase that. Another way is to look at the empty space here just in general, and not to turn it into a piece of an item that we already know, like a triangle, but to kind of cut it out like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, like so. So inside of there, you have that little shape there, and then on the other side, you have a shape that looks like this. And then you have your stem that's empty, or positive space in the middle. So remember, this is positive space here, this is positive, positive, positive. All these different spots where there is something is called positive space. Does that really matter what we call it? No, only if you want to memorize it, but you just need to know how to use it. So we have our negative space there. And remember that each time you use a grid, what you're doing is you're taking a little bit of information from one box and transferring it here. And then you move on to the next box and you do the same thing, okay? So for over here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna transfer the information I have here down to this box. So I'm gonna look here, it looks like coming right about there, goes up like this, comes over that way, kind of a shape like that. Down comes my stem. Out comes kind of a stabby little shape there, and then goes out kind of like that. And that might be a little farther over, but it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that so you can see what I did. And you can see how those shapes kind of transfer over. Okay, so now that I have A done, I'm going to move on over either up or this way. Okay, don't go from here to there. You want to go one to the next one like you're filling it out. Boom, boom, boom. So I'm going to go on over and I'm going to go up one. I'm going to go from here this way. Now, this is kind of interesting. Now we have a different way that we can look at these. We just use negative and positive shapes over here, okay, in space. Then we have triangulation, we have crosshairs, and comparative ruler. So comparative ruler is kind of helpful when you're doing something that's the same size, but we're not doing something that's the same size, okay? We're not doing something that's the same size, so we can't really use comparative ruler right now. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use crosshairs. I'm going to use this marker here, and I'm going to go through this line like this, real gentle from one side to the other. If you can't draw a straight line, don't worry. You have a piece of paper right next to you, just turn it like this and draw your lines like so. Okay, and then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do the same thing. Since this is a bigger space and my hands are a little wobbly today, I'm going to go ahead and draw a nice gentle line there. And whenever you're drawing your line, especially when you're drawing your grid too, you don't have to draw it hard. Okay, everybody, this line here does not have to be a very dark line that makes your grid outline. In fact, it's kind of a hindrance later on when you're drawing. So you want to kind of draw it nice and gentle like. It doesn't have to be real dark. It's only there to help guide you. If it helps you your first couple times through, fine, go ahead, draw it a little dark. But as you start to progress, please start to lighten up on that. Going into this second section here, I'm going to look at this line that I have. And all it does is it takes angles. So it takes angles that are in the box here, and helps you compare them as you move them this way. So if I look over here, that also helps me make another little shape. I see a little shape that looks kind of weird, like a weird box over there. So I know that this petal over here is going to make a shape that goes down like this and then comes up, and it goes through this way. It tips up just a little bit like that, and then it's going to come down like that. Okay, and all it does is these are margins and guides to help you with shape, and that's all they're there for. That's it. Okay, now we have these little things that are going on inside here. I can look over there and start to gently move them down this way. There's some other little things going on here. Bring one up that way. I'm just starting to identify and go through there. Now this will take a lot of time to study little things like this, so we're not going to concentrate on that. I'm going to concentrate on showing you how a grid works today. All right, so looking this way here, like that, and I might do a speed drawing later. We'll see if we have time. Like so, moving this way there, a little bit rounded, coming down like that. And I think that actually kind of went out a little farther. The reason I say that is that it went a little too far. The human eye is really good at cutting things in half mentally, okay? So if you do crosshairs on this one, and remember crosshairs can be half and half, or they can be point to point. Like this, like that, so we know that halfway point is in between these, like so, like that. And you don't have to do this for every box, everybody. This is just to help you if you're having trouble, okay? A lot of people are perfectly fine drawing their whole grid object without any of these extra helpers. So don't feel bad if you have to use them. They're there as an extra tool. So looking over here, and I look there, see how it went a little bit past there, and if I draw this from here to there, I can tell I didn't quite make the match like I was supposed to, okay? So that means this has to go up a little bit further, more like that. There we go. And then we have some other things going on over here. We have a line that comes through there like this, goes down this way, and then there's a little guy that comes up kind of right here, goes up, a little shape like that, starts to go over this way. Okay, starting to put those in like that. So what I've done there is I've used the triangulation, or I'm sorry, the crosshairs to do that, okay? So I've used different shapes in here to help me break down these other shapes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something that I don't normally do with grid work. I'm going to bounce up to another section, and we're going to pretend that we've worked on over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, we're going to find, let's see, F. We'll do E and F, so these ones right here, E and F, and we're going to do by the bird's head, so at the top here. So these ones right there. And I'm going to kind of outline this a little bit so you can see the ones that we're working on. It's hard to trace and identify sometimes ones that you are practicing on. And that's something that happens too. If you're somebody who gets mixed up with large amounts of information, guess what? You can take away those large amounts of information to start out with. Just don't do it the whole time, okay? So for instance, here we're doing E and F and 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 this way right here, and then E and F is down here, so boop, 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 boop. This guy's right there. So I'm going to be working on these fellas right here, like that. And I'll keep them close to me. And then I can get rid of the extra information that I don't need by having a blocking sheet. Blocking sheet is literally just a piece of paper to kind of dull out the information that you have in front of you. So that way you're not working with too much stuff, because sometimes it can be overwhelming, and that's okay. It can be really useful. Information that is brought to us quickly can be very useful in the brain, but it can also be a hindrance, and it can really get in our way sometimes of trying to do something simple that later comes together as a large piece that works all together. And this is kind of for the forest for the trees when we're working on this part. So what we want to do here is we want to look at the little bird's face and his little beak area here, down here. We're going to start in this corner right there, okay? And this time we're going to use triangulation. Now, triangulation is when you use 3 points of reference or more, usually 3 to 4, okay? Doesn't mean it has to make a perfect triangle. It just means you're using 3 different points of reference, okay? So if I look over here, I'm going to try to measure where his little eye falls, okay? Where his eye starts over here, it's right there and right there in this box. Same thing on the other side, okay? And if I can measure that, that'll help me a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line through here like this, from one side to the other, and that'll help me see how close to that side he is. So looking at our bird's beak down here, I'm going to go ahead and divide this bottom area here in half from corner to corner using these crosshairs, like so. And if I look here, I see just short of this triangle is where his little beak starts. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use that to kind of put his little beak in. And I'm just doing the gentle outline of what's there right now. See, it starts to fill this area here. He's got some lines to go through there, and there's his little nostril. Now, if I go over this way, if I notice his eye starts a little bit higher than middle. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to outline his little eye, like so. And then I want to take a look at where the top of his head is coming from, like so. So I'm using the information that I have in this block here, and I'm putting it in this one there. I'm going to go ahead and outline this just to make it darker so you can see, but please know that you do not want to draw this hard, especially when you're first starting to sketch something in. I'm simply doing this so that you at home can see this a little bit better. Okay, and now I'm going to work my way on up to the next block. Over here, I don't need too much help because I can see that it starts right there where it left off and it goes through in a gentle kind of sloping motion. Same thing over here, gentle kind of sloping, goes a little past half and then starts to wiggle its way down a little bit, like so. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put in his little eyeball there. Put in the little circle that goes around his eye there. And lucky for us, we have a little stripe that happens right where his little beak starts there and goes through his eye. It's kind of scrubby, like so. Goes up this way, goes down that way a little bit, and then it kind of gets a little darker throughout here, and that's more of a value system that you'll play with. In the background up here, we have shapes which are our flowers, and notice how they're kind of vague in the background. They're not real crisp. Remember we talked about boundaries before in Drawing 101? The boundaries here are not as easy to see, and sometimes that's tricky. So instead of putting down a line, what we would normally do is we would kind of sketch in light and darks. But just for you to be able to see at home how this works with the grid system, I'm going to go ahead and gently kind of rough in some shapes here. Oop, I think I moved over. I did. Moved over a bunch. Need my own blocking sheet. There we go. So, starting over there, going here, coming up this way, it's coming around a little bit there, a little bit more coming down this way, and that's all the information that we have in there for a general outline. So when we move back, we can see we would have to start moving over to the next section. So what people usually do is they do this, where they start to move over like that. Let yourself have one more area. And this is going to be where the flower starts to come in shape-wise here. So follow that line down to the shape that it makes there. Kind of comes up real loosely here. Then down here, there's kind of a weird bump. Comes up like that. This shape comes out kind of like this, out that way. And once again, as we're sketching, we're not too worried about having everything nailed down perfectly. It's more of a matter of starting to sketch in the general gist of things, and as you progress through your drawing, you'll start to nail down the exact proportion, the exact shape of things. This is kind of like a framework. It's like when you're putting up a house, or when someone puts up a house. I don't put up houses, but when someone puts up a house, you need a structure. You need the frame underneath, right? You need all the studs and everything to put your walls up, and by the time you're done, you have a beautiful house, but you got to start somewhere. So this is just your starting somewhere. So please don't commit too hard to this, okay? No one would ever build a house with studs that were all messed up first, right? So lay out your general studs and make sure they're in the right place, and then go ahead and adjust as you need. So over here, I'm going to show you how to use a comparative ruler. So you need something that stays in your environment when you're drawing all the time. One of those things is a pencil. And there's one thing in a pencil that doesn't really change. If you're using a drawing pencil, it might not have this. It might not have a stick at the end. But a number 2, if you're just using one of those, has this little metal piece that's pretty standard across the industry at the end. They're pretty much the same on all pencils. So that being said, if you come over here and you use this as a little ruler, you don't need to know how many inches it is or centimeters or anything. That doesn't matter. A comparative ruler is you're taking an object and comparing it against something else, okay? So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to see if I can find something that's about the same size as this little area. Ah, look at that. So that little ball that's right there is almost exactly the same size as the silver part on our ruler here. So when we're going to draw that, we can use our comparative ruler. So we're drawing it over here, and say we have our grid down this area like this, okay? And this is the other squares here, blah, blah, blah. They have stuff inside of them. Oh, can you guys see that? There we go. So you have your stuff inside of there. When we go over here and we measure this, we want to make sure, we'll pretend that this has a little box through it as well, like this, just for now, to help us out, like that. We're going to go ahead and make sure that that is the same size there. So that little ball that I'm starting to draw here is going to be in this area right there. And I'm going to make sure that it's the same size by comparing it here. So I'm looking straight down. Ooh, I made it a little small. So that's all a comparative ruler is that you're usually using something that doesn't change. You can use an actual ruler, but that involves a lot of actual measuring, and we're not trying to be that precise. We're trying to train our brain to see space and shape and size for what it is without having to go back and forth and precisely measure things. So for this next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use these different techniques that we spoke about. Shapes in space, negative and positive, triangulation, crosshairs, and comparative ruler, if I need it, probably not with the size, right? I'm going to use these, and I'm going to go ahead and speed draw for you so you can see what it looks like after you've used a grid and how quickly it can be done.